Okay, so the pasuk says, "Vayishlach Yitzchak es Yaakov." Yitzchak sends Yaakov away to go to the house of Lavan, right, his uncle, Ben Besuel, Lavan, the son of Besuel Ha'arami. I mean, it highlights his whole name. We already know who these people are. Lavan, the son of Besuel, the Aramean. Achi Rivka, the brother of Rivka. Aim Yaakov Esav, the mother of Yaakov and Esav. Says Rashi, Eini Yodea Mama Lamdenu. The pasuk is definitely teaching us something. I don't know what it is. I don't know why it's necessary to remind me that this is the mother of Yaakov and Esav. Okay. Now let's listen to the pasuk again. Yitzchak sends Yaakov to go to Padan Aram to Lavan, the son of Besuel, the Arami, who was, incidentally, the brother of Rivka, who's the mother of Yaakov and Esav. That's the pasuk. Now, in the beginning of the parsha, Yitzchak is 40 years old. Yitzchak is 40 years old when he takes Rivka, Bas Besuel, Ha'arami, from Padan Aram, which again is extraneous information. So on that pasuk, her shevach, to sing her praises. Shahaisa Bas Rasha. She was the daughter of a wicked man, and the sister of a wicked man. Umekoma Anshe Resha, and her whole town were people of wickedness. Velo Lomda Mima Asehem. And Rivka didn't learn from their behaviors. So the same language is used in these psukim. So we already know this principle. Now I want to tell you that there's a whole discussion. We know that Avraham, in Rosh Hashanah davening, just listen to these words. In Rosh Hashanah davening, we say, Akedas Yitzchak Hayom Lizaro Tiskor. Akedas Yitzchak, today, remember it for his children. And some wanted to change this, back in Ashkenaz, wanted to change it to say, Lizera Yaakov Tiskor. The Akedas Yitzchak, remember the merit of Akedas Yitzchak for his children through Yaakov, because otherwise we're giving Esav also the merit of Akedas Yitzchak, and we don't necessarily want to do that as they're hurting us into oven after oven. So we don't want them getting any extra merits. We're struggling with them. We need them to have less merit so that we can survive them. That's the nusach. The mainstream, well-known nusach is Lizaro, to the children of Yitzchak. And the Rivash says the following. Even if you say to the children of Yitzchak, Esav is not considered one of the children of Yitzchak. Based upon a Gemara Nedarim. The Gemara Nedarim says if a person says, I promise not to get any pleasure or something, I won't eat any apples in the houses of anyone who's the child of Avram Avinu. So he's only prohibited in Yitzchak and Yitzchak's descendants through the Jews. In other words, you don't have to worry about the Esav, because Esav is not one of the descendants of Yitzchak, even though he's biologically Yitzchak's. That's Esav. Chasam Sofer points out that he is still considered the child of Rivka. He brings different psukim to prove it. So Esav doesn't connect to Yitzchak halachically, but he connects to Rivka. So he's still her child. The question is, what's the meaning of that? Now, just to add on to that premise, that Esav still has the Rivka side, but not the Yitzchak side, says Reb Chaim Vital. Reb Chaim Vital is a great student of the Arizal. So he says that we know that in the beginning of the parsha it says Shnei Goyim bevitnech. Rivka's pregnant and she goes to seek Hashem's counsel, and Rashi says they went to Shem, and he says there's two nations living in your stomach. Shnei Goyim bevitnech, Shnei Geim bevitnech. That means two great men are in your stomach. This refers to word of Avodah Rashi's quoting. This refers to Rebbe Yehuda Hanasi, who wrote the Mishnah, and Antoninus and Rebbe. These two great men. So he says, what does that help? In other words, why would she be pleased to hear that, and how does that help? So he says like this. He says, according to the sources, Esav took on the characteristics of his mother, and Yaakov took on the characteristics of Yitzchak. So Yaakov came from the spiritual energy of Yitzchak. Now we know how much Yitzchak loved Rivka. Pasuk says that he loved her. So he loved Esav, who had the qualities of Rivka. We're going to find out how Esav terribly misused those qualities. But that was Esav. But the answer was, and Yaakov comes from the father, and Esav comes from the mother. So he says, a child came out that's just like my family. So she's going to be very frustrated. In other words, she was very upset. She says, what benefit could there be? He understands that she understood there must have been twins. But she couldn't be satisfied with this idea that one is going to be like Yitzchak and one is going to be like me. So then what was the point? Lama za anochi? Why was I even chosen to be part of this family? If anyone that comes from my side is rotten. And the answer is no, Antoninus is going to come from you. Antoninus was a very great man who was a supporter of Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi. He gave him political independence to be able to teach Torah and to write the Mishnah. In a time, many Romans did not treat the Jews that way. Financially, he was very generous with him to help be able to write the Mishnah. So there was an enormous amount of financial support, because in order to put down the Mishnah, Victor Miller explains this, historically they needed to gather all the greatest rabbis to be sitting together and learning, huge groups of people, full time. Meaning these are not people that were able to have, so they needed an enormous amount of financial support just to be able to have them be free to, and Antoninus provided that. And so there was a person who came from her, from the Esav side, who was righteous and did it right. And therefore, she understood that she was bringing something to the Jewish people. That's what he says. So that Esav is like Rivka and not like Yitzchak. And Yaakov is considered a child of both Yitzchak and Rivka. Right? But Rivka is the mother of both of these guys. So that's what that pasuk said. Rashi, I don't know what it's teaching you, so I'm not saying that we have an answer to Rashi, but this is the beginning of Aim Yaakov Esav. She is the one parent that they have in common. The question is, what does that mean? So the first thing we learned about Rivka is this Rashi, that she came from a city of wicked people, and her father was wicked, and her brother was wicked, and she wasn't impacted. She didn't learn she was stubborn. Gemara in Sanhedrin, look at this one. Gemara in Sanhedrin says, Sanhedrin Lamed Tes. So it should show up at some point. There we go. Here I found it. Okay. So it says the following. There was a prophet who was the Haftorah, usually, always in Parshas told us, of Ovadia. Ovadia is a one-chapter prophecy, and it's a scathing attack on Edom, on Esav's descendants. All the really negative things we have about Esav. This is the main source that you would go to. There's also Masab too, but there's other places in Tanakh. But this is Edom is the major prophecy. So why? So Gemara says, why did Hashem select Ovadia? Ovadia lived in the times of King Achav and Queen Jezebel, and they were trying to kill all the Chachamim. And Ovadia took 100 Chachamim and split them up into two caves, which the Gemara says, according to one position, the way he knew to do that is because that's how Yaakov combated Esav. Remember, he split the camp into two, so that if one gets caught, the other survives. So too, Vayachat, right? That's what he did. So too, Ovadia did the same thing. But Ovadia was a convert from Edom. So Ovadia is a convert. He's a Christian, a Esav convert. So Maishna Ovadia le'Edom, says the Gemara. Why would Ovadia be the right person to give this one prophecy that we have recorded from him is about Edom? Kol Amar Hashem Elokim le'Edom. Why? Yavo Ovadiahu. Let this great Obadiah, Hadar ben Shnei Rishon, he should come. He lived among two wicked people. Rashi says it's Achav and Izevel. V'lo lamad mima'asem, and he didn't learn from their behavior. V'yinabe al Esav, and let him testify about Esav. Harasha. Shadar ben Shnei Tzadikim. He lived among two totally righteous people. Right? Who are those two totally righteous people? Who do you think? Yitzchak and Rivka. Isn't that interesting? In other words, it doesn't mention Yaakov. I don't know if they had to separate them, but he lived with Yitzchak and Rivka. and he didn't learn from their behavior. And then it says, Hainu da Amrienshi. And that's what the proverb, the colloquial saying, Mine ube abba nazil be narga. From the forest itself comes the handle for the axe. So that's a line from the song. I use that exact lashon because that's from Matis Yahu's song, Chop 'em Down. Right? That's how the song goes. From the forest itself comes the handle for the axe. So that's this Gemara. It's an ironic thing that the thing that's chopping down all these trees is a piece of wood from one of the trees. That's the only way that this axe handle really is very impactful is through the tree. So similarly, let Ovadia, who's from Esav, come and be the one who chops down. So that's very interesting. Ovadia is Ger Edomi. Ger Edomi. So Ovadia also has this quality that we said Rivka has, which is what? Stubborn. And you could be standing around everyone's Rishon, and somehow you can have the courage to stand up to that. And that's a unique quality. Most people don't have this. It's a very difficult thing, but it's right there in the beginning of Shulchan Aruch. One of the first things it says in Shulchan Aruch, the Ramah, first Ramah, says, Al Yevosh Al Hamal'igim La'olav Ba'avodas Hashem. You should never be embarrassed of people that will mock you and make fun of you for serving Hashem. So it would sound like from there that if it's just about embarrassment or discomfort, a person should always proudly have their yarmulke in everyone's face. That's what it sounds like. A person won't be able to have a job. They won't be able to support their family. That's when people don't wear their yarmulke at work. Ramosha and others that will pass. That's okay. But al yevosh, to be able to look at people that go, oh, you're too frum, you're too religious. That's right in the beginning of Shulchan Aruch. That's one of the first lessons that you learn from Be Like a Lion. Okay, so that's number one. But there's a lot more. I want to just first talk about this idea of the surroundings, because for most people, it's just endlessly impactful. It's very difficult. How do you do it? For example, there's a Rambam in the Laws of Deos who says the following. Derech briyoso shel adam. It is the way that human beings were created by Hashem. Lihios nimshach b'deosav v'ma'asav achiv v'chaver. To be pulled in their attitudes and their behavior after their friends and their companions. Noheg kemineg anshe medinaso. Behaving in the way of the people in their country. Persons therefore obligated to make friends with righteous people and to sit around wise people, tamid, consistently. Tamid, sit with Ted and Yitzi, right? In order that you learn from their behavior, and you have to put distance between yourself and wicked people who wander around in the dark. In order that Shelo Yilma, you should learn from them. That is what Shlomo Melech says. Holech es chachamim yechkam. A person who walked with the wise will become wise. V'ro exilim, and a shepherd of fools. Even if you're their shepherd, it will ruin you. He says, if you lived in a country where the behavior is bad and the people don't act in a good way, so you have to go to another country. So you have to move. He says, and if all the countries that you know about or have even heard about are horrible places, like nowadays, says the Rambam in the 1100s, Kemos Manenu. Oh, or you can't go for some other reason because it's dangerous or because of illnesses. So then you have to live on your own. Yeshev levado yechidi. Live a solitary life. And if they're so bad that they won't allow you to sit alone, then you have to go move into a cave in the wilderness. But you're not allowed to stay there. So Derek Briyoso Shalom, it's the way human beings were built. It's very important for us to understand this, that human beings were built to really care what other people think. And the person who's like, I don't care what other people think, just figured out a trick that when you pretend you don't care, people respect you even more. And that feels great, right? To the point that Chazal want us not to be so preoccupied with kavod. So they tell us, if you run away from kavod, it runs after you. That's how they incentivized us to run away from kavod.
I've been running for years. Where is it?
Right? You run away from kavod, and the kavod follows you. Right? They say there's a guy who would say this. The famous line from I think Reb Chaim Volozhin. He said, "Rebbe, I've been running away from kavod for years." He's like, "Yeah, but you keep looking back because you have to run away and not look back." If you run away from kavod, and by the way, it's generally a good principle that by not standing on your own kavod, that generally even in small interactions gives you more kavod. But a person who's demanding of I want this and I want that, it looks horrible on anyone else in the world when they're looking for honor. But like we forget that it looks horrible for ourselves also. Instead, like no one remembers that when it's them. But it really looks bad to be running after kavod. But still the incentive, I always got such a kick out of it. That it's like run away from kavod so that you'll get more kavod. I mean, you'll get it. You'll get it in the end. Just the way to do it is not. So even that is like such a surprise. But listen to this Mishnah. Because this Mishnah is astonishing. I've never really gotten to the bottom of this. I mean, I see what it says, and I know it's true, but it's mind-boggling how much this describes the human condition. Listen to this one. Mishnah says, if you have somebody who did a crime that has gotten them the death penalty, when they're about 10 paces away from killing the person, Omrim lo hisvadeh, they tell him, be misvada, say vidui. Right? Chatasi, avisi, pashati, say, admit your sin. Shekin derech hamumasin misvadim. It's the proper way for people being put to death should do vidui, because kol hamisvadeh yesh lo chelik lo. So we tell them this whole thing. We say anybody who does vidui can still have a portion in the world to come. Your death will be a kapara, and you'll head to the world to come through this process. So when we tell them, it's the way everyone does it. Don't think this is derech hamumasin. It's the way anybody put to death. This is part of the process. And then you can go to Olam Haba. And we tell them, shekin matzinu ba'achon. We found this in Yehoshua chapter 7, the story of Achan who took from the cherem when he shouldn't have. And Yehoshua said to him, Bini simna kavod l'Hashem Elokei Yisrael v'sed lo toda. My son, give kavod to God and acknowledge that you're being justly killed. Vayan Achan es Yehoshua v'yomer Amon anochi chatasi. Achan said Amon. He said, it's true. I did sin to Hashem, and such is what I did. And how do we know? We tell the person, by the way, the pasuk teaches us that Achan was forgiven. Shene'emar vayomer Yehoshua. Yehoshua said to him, Ma achartanu yakorcha Hashem bayom hazeh. I mean, you've dirtied, right? You're dirtied on this day. Hayom hazeh, but it's only for today. But in the next life, you will, in the Olam Haba, in the next world, you will not be dirtied. From any of the what a person doesn't know what to say. Omrim lo, Amor, we say, repeat after me. Tehei misosi kapara al kol avonosai. Let my death be a kapara for all of my failings, all my sins. So you can imagine this person. He's being killed. They've got him in chains. He's 10 steps away. Time to do. Rabbi Yehuda says, Im haya yodeh shehu mizumam. What if he knows that he was framed? What should he do? Omer, he should instead say, Tehei misosi kapara al kol avonosai. May my death be mechaper all my sins, chutz me'avon zeh, but not this one, because he's clean. So he'll make this. That's a striking announcement. Go out with a bang, and then he'll get a kapara for the rest of his things through his death. And this thing he doesn't need a kapara for. Amrulo, they said back to him, "In Cain, you can't let him do that with you. You're too honest, but you don't understand people." He called Adam Amrim Kach. Every person would say that. K'dei lenakos es atzman, to look innocent. So think about if that was us. Let's say we did something we shouldn't have done, and we're being killed, and our whole family's there, and everyone we know has come out. This is a big event, right? To say goodbye, to hope that maybe there'll be some last-minute reprieve, and you see the time has come. And you believe in Olam Haba. You're a Jew who believes in the next world, and either way, you're not living more than 3 minutes. So it's a terrible, I mean, you talk about Pascal's wager. This is a horrible wager to figure, you know what, I'll give up the whole Olam Haba in order to make a 1-minute impression, and then you're dead. You're not going to enjoy this one. I mean, if you believe in the life after death, right, then it's going to be much better for you to do the vidui now. And if you don't believe in it, so then what, for 1 minute, you're willing to risk the possibility? But the whole thing is so absurd, but we're talking about believing Jews. So I don't understand. Think about this person. Is he insane? And the answer is the drive to be respected, even after you're gone, is so enormous for people that they will give up all of their Olam Haba for a couple of minutes, a couple moments of a room full of people saying, he was innocent. What a good guy. When it's not even true. That's what the Mishnah is telling us. That's a massive lesson, that people will give up everything. You know, when it comes to, I was talking to a young man who's dating, and for years, he was extremely insistent on only dating like a girl with a PhD, like a really really accomplished, academic. And after like a little bit of time in therapy, he understood that was low self-esteem. That's what it was. In other words, he doesn't, unless he can come home with someone on his arm who's that impressive, unless it's giving him that level of kavod, then it doesn't matter. Like, who says that's even the best wife for him? Like, he realized later that he's much more compatible with less high-powered personalities. But it took a long time to figure that out, because you understand, in other words, the desire for kavod. Rabbi Abraham J. Tversky says that as a psychiatrist for a massive career, he said that the overwhelming majority, says, was in the high 97, some number like this, absurd number of people's issues is all self-esteem, and the other, like whatever percent it isn't, is a chemical problem. Everything is self-esteem, and some is chemical. Like, they just literally need different chemicals in their body because they're seeing double, and they think there's people waiting in their mailbox to kill them. That's what it is. Isn't that something? That kavod is such a huge thing for us. By the way, the number one motivator for people in the world is the respect and admiration of those who they love and care about. For our children, in the classroom, in the world, like, giving people kavod is the greatest thing you can give them. Respecting somebody for real, seeing them for being valuable, and it's the biggest motivator. So when I look at a school for my children, so I have to figure out very, very importantly, who are their friends. And you could tell me all about how they have the best rabbis and the best education in the land, and I got to figure out now who are their friends. Now, the problem can sometimes be that what looks really good right now isn't always the long-term story. So just as an example, there are schools that talk a lot about how we teach about derech eretz. And you'll have another school where the kids are literally hanging upside down from like the ceiling, right? You come in and it's like, and you think like, this is, now the truth is someone might not get any learning done over there. So that could be a problem. But when I meet adults, I have to figure out, like, the people that went to that school where it was wilder, do they do more or less chesed? Are they more generous? Are they more friendly, right, than these ones, or less? Because sometimes there's no connection between the fact that one school was super strict and had everybody tuck their shirt in and walk quietly in the hallway. It was just kind of a scary school. That was called being strict. It wasn't really teaching people to be kind people. That mostly happens in the family. Schools that say we talk a lot about chesed, it's nice, but the people that you meet almost consistently, if the family is focused on chesed and the family does projects of chesed and invites people into their home and these sort of things, those are the people who you find generally, or people who work on it on their own as adults. But like, you don't really find that because they went to school that taught more psukim about chesed or stories about chesed, that it's necessarily any better. So you have to know. But who are the friends? What is that? What is the value system? If you are going to raise children in a value system where what's most impressive is getting into an Ivy League school, and that's when everybody gets up and applauds, and that's what everybody appreciates, then that's going to have an enormous impact. And one of the great successes of the Chabad world, and even of the general black hat world, is having the best and brightest are willing to be a second grade Rebbe. In the more centrist Orthodox world, it's like a little bit humiliating if a kid wants to go and become a Rebbe. Rabbi Muskin here, Shlita, once said this to his people. He said, you want more modern Orthodox rabbis? He said, but which of you would let your kid become a rabbi? And he was very strong about this. He was like, this is why the schools, if you look at the modern Orthodox schools in Los Angeles, overwhelming majority of the Rabbeim and Moras are kind of from Yeshivish or Chabad also. In other words, because if you have these people who come in, the best, most outrageously talented and excited, and like in other areas, they're going into finance and law and medicine and, all these different areas. What do you guys work in, right? So I just want to make sure that I pick the top, but really, that's the truth, right? And then it's a big advantage. So there are shuls in town where when a boy gets into bris, gets into, like something like that, so everyone's like, wow. So that's going to be an enormous motivator for that young man. Whereas, I know a fellow who went to become an attorney, and he didn't do it at a ripe old age. This guy did it, 19, 20 already. He was applying to law school, or whatever, 21. And he wound up becoming a lawyer and successful, makes a lot of money, doesn't have a second of Chol HaMoed to himself, but he usually gets Thanksgiving. Like that, the law firms are very careful about. But otherwise, he just, he's working too hard, and he's coming home too late at night. He's missing too much, and he doesn't actually really love looking over contracts all day. Like he thought he was going to be Perry Mason or something. And there's none of that, right? And it's just not what he loves. He's really kind of stuck because of the nannies and the lifestyle. He can't go and become a physical therapist right, and downgrade his hat. Like at this point, he's kind of stuck for another 30 years doing this. And he told me once that the reason that he did it, he realizes now, is because of what it meant to girls and people in shul. And when he said that he was like in such and such a law school, and it was like he was going to law school, he was going to do this, like that was, it changed everything about who he was in the eyes of, and he didn't know then that that's why. He thought, well, I'm smart and I'm a good Jewish head, and like this will be a good thing for me. And like, but what really motivated him was that in the society he was in, this was so respected that he didn't have a chance to think. I once read something about this, about how they have a hard, people that go to become a PA. And basically, in many areas, they can even be superior to a doctor if they specialize in some specific area, something else. And yet, it's so many people were interviewed to, why wouldn't they just do this? Save so many years of school. And if you're going to open your own practice anyway, looking at people's feet or whatever it is, like you can make significantly more money than many doctors make just going to work somewhere, right? So like, why not do this? And many, many people acknowledged. I remember reading this years ago when I had like a friend who was going into PA school, and it was like, there's a distinguished position of kavod that comes from being a medical doctor that isn't there. And that even though the person will tell you in their medicals, everything they wrote in their medical school, think about how they want to save lives, they want to help people, and it was all would all be equally relevant to this really much easier, much less financially difficult. You wouldn't have to put off marriage for 10 years and moving around the country for this residency and that thing. COVID's an enormous motivator. And therefore, we have to be very, very mindful of what societies we insert ourselves in, like the Rambam said, because this is huge. I mean, people, and for our children, and make sure that we give the right kavod within our shuls and society, Okay.
My brother was outspoken that's why he wanted to go to med school.
Wow. A very honest person. It's a very deep thing that most people don't have it's such an unpleasant part about ourselves to have to acknowledge that, I think Rabbi Yerucham has somewhere he writes about this, where he says a person is sitting there alone in a hotel room, they're sitting somewhere, and suddenly like a homeless, but like a totally insignificant person to you walks into the room, and we like fix our tie and our hair, like suddenly it matters how we look, because it's so sad. Like that's what we said, be yourself. I don't care what anyone thinks about me. And they say, yes, you do. They say, they're furious that you said they do care. So, I mean, you just proved them wrong. I mean, clearly they care so much that they've lost their mind trying to prove to you how much they don't care. It's like a really pernicious part of the human experience, but it's also can be used extremely well. Put people around the right society, the right things, and it can have an incredible impact. And yet, sometimes, says the Rambam, you have to close yourself off into your own bubble as if those people don't exist, because there's nowhere else in the world to go. Rivka has that quality. Rivka has this enormously amazing quality, and let's learn from it. The children are scuffling in her stomach, and she says, Im kain lama ze anochi, which the Ramban interprets, halavai eineni she'amus. If I'm going to have kids like this, so they're fighting in her stomach, I would rather be dead or never been born. It sounds like a pouty teenager. I wish I was never born. Why? Because I lost my sweater or something, right? Because my teacher gave too much, right? He's like, what was going on in your life? What could be worth not being born for? She's Rivka Imenu. So, Chatzkel Weinfeld Shlita has one of my Rebbeim says over from his father, the Lev Avram, something magnificent. He says, what was Avraham Avinu's problem with all these religious Jews, Abrahamic people, who he converted? It says Avram was Megayer the men, and Sarah was Megayer. So there was never a better Rebbe than Avram. Okay, maybe Moshe Rabbeinu. It's certainly one of the better Rebbeim than any elementary school Rebbe you had, right? And he sat with people, with Sarah Imenu, with the wives, and all the girls are learning from like the greatest woman in history, and all the other Magolabanach, the greatest, most loving, amazing Rebbe is Avram Avinu. And none of these, there's not one of them that could marry Yitzchak. Eliezer, who winds up going to Gan Eden alive, I mean, he didn't raise his daughters sitting with Sarah. Like, what's going on? And Avram says, don't take one of these people, you get over there to my family. And who's his family? I mean, these horrible people who try to kill Eliezer, just rotten scoundrels, two Rishon with a little sister. So there's a Drashas Haran, a very important piece, where he says, Averos and false attitudes, bad hashkafas, bad Torah attitudes do not get inherited to children. If a parent is a guy who likes to commit murder, right, and he committed a lot of murders, those murders don't pass down, and his attitudes don't pass down. But midos, tchunos hanefesh umidos, the midos of a person, they get passed down. So in other words, if you have somebody who comes from a family that are good people, but they're not religious, so don't worry. If the child's religious, don't worry about it. You can marry them. In other words, you have a girl, the guy's a yeshivish guy. The girl comes from a modern family. Are they lovely? Are they kind? Are they sincere people? So they have a different hashkafa. So she shares your hashkafa. So what's the big deal? But this is what I remember Rabbi Kalish used to say from this round. But if you have a group of people who share your identical hashkafa, but they don't have good midos, so that's something that generally passes along to children. That's enormously impactful, midos. Character traits, quality of the person. And therefore, derech eretz called Torah. It's if a person's healthy and has good qualities, so then they can always grow, they can always change. The people in Avraham's area had a terrible, terrible midah, and that would have been passed along to their children. And that midah was they were just easily converted to Judaism. They would come for one meal, and he would sell them hard on this timeshare type, come on, let's all bench together. One meal. Anybody who becomes religious over one meal, all of Avraham Avinu's people left in the long run. Maybe in the time of Yitzchak. There are different discussions about exactly when this happened, but they didn't make it, and they didn't become part of the Jewish people. Because if you could become religious in one meal, then you'll go over to the mosque for the next meal. I'm like, man, these Ramadan, they got 30 of them in a row, these crazy feasts, There's goat turning around. Like, this is great. He goes on about this, but that's the Drush Haran and Drush Hay. Avram had a brother, and this brother's name was Haran, one of his brothers. There are three brothers, Avram, Nahor, and Haran. Haran was somewhere in between Nahor and Avram, because the Targum Yonasan says that when Avram is thrown into the fiery furnace, Haran, unlike everyone else in Ur Kasdim, said the following. He said, if Avram comes out alive, I'm on Avram's side. And if not, then I'm on Nimrod's side. I mean, I have to see, but this is the perfect test. And if then I'll be... And Avram came out alive, so Haran says, they said, now what about you, Haran? And he said, I follow Avram. And he died. So the Zohar famously says that if you go in expecting to die, miracles can happen for you. But if you go in expecting a miracle, no, because then you didn't give your life up, and then you need to lose your life. But Avram gave his life up. And then Hashem says, okay, you don't need to, fine. He gave it up, just like with Akedah Skitzak. He gave over his son. He was ready to kill him. So now Hashem says, okay, I see that you mean it. You don't have to do it. Okay, that was Avram. However, there's something remarkable in the Haggadah. We quote a pasuk where we mention Me'ever Hanar. We say, our ancestors were idol worshippers. They used to live, it's a pasuk in Yeshua, on the other side of this river lived your parents, your ancestors. Terach, the father of Avraham, and the father of Nahor. So question is, where's Haran in the pasuk? He doesn't get mentioned. You have to know, Haran doesn't exist. He doesn't stand for anything. He's a person who'll go this way, who'll go that way. And that's totally not something that is useful for the Jewish people. That's not useful. Avram Avinu, with those type of people, he can't let Yitzchak marry one of those people, because how are the Jewish people going to last? They need stubborn. They need someone who could live among Rishon and be the opposite, contrarian people. You tell them this way, they say the opposite. Am Kashei Oref. The Medrash says the Jewish people are extremely stubborn. Where does that come from? It comes from Rivka. That's where the stubbornness comes from. The Am Kashei Oref. And the Medrash says that after the Jewish people worship the golden calf, so Hashem's ready to destroy them. And Moshe says, no, you got to forgive them. Ki am kshei orefu, because they're stubborn. And the Medrash learns, and says, find a Jew sometime in history and ask him. Say, why are they taking you out to kill you? And they'll say, because I gave my child a bris milah. And then ask the next one, why are they taking you out to burn you at the stake? And he'll say, because I learned Torah. And the next one, because I took a lulav and an esrog. And the next one, because I ate matzah on Pesach. In other words, one by one, why are they crucifying you? It goes through all the different kinds of deaths that the Jewish people have put. And it says that that's a very important Am Che'or. Moshe said to Hashem, listen, these people are stubborn as heck, and they'll worship the golden calf minutes after Har Sinai. But if you can get them on your side, boy, are you going to have some real people that'll make it through all of history. And that's the story that it's described about the Kotzker. There's a famous city. How did he get to Kotsk? He was in the city called Tamashov. That's where he was. And he was going off on his own, and he was looking for a place to settle. And he went from town to town. Many of them received him extremely warmly and said, Rebbe, what an honor it would be to have you in our town. And his Hasidim are with him. And he gets to Kotsk, and people threw rocks at him and chased him out of town screaming, no Hasidic types in our town. Instead, they really didn't want him there. And the Kotzker said, oh, this is Ashdod. That's a town. This is where we're going to live. And they said to him, what are you, crazy? What are you, crazy? His Hasidim said, Rebbe, come on. And he said, I mean, here you could have a real Chassid. I mean, the rest of these people are just, they're vanilla. But if I can find somebody here who then I can convince of something, I can have a real follower. That's a real person.
You always said you enjoyed it, teaching the students that questioned you, kind of intellectually battled against you more than.
Those are the ones who care. The students who fight and argue. I remember with Rabbi Mati Berger, I had the great privilege of teaching in Eish Torah in Essentials program. And after me, oftentimes I would be lined up where Rabbi Mati Berger was either right before or right after. And he would be teaching the same group of beginners. And so every so often I would say to him, so what do you think about this guy? I mean, you meet a new guy with big smile. And he said, this guy's just too nice. He says, I don't see it going anywhere with him. I said, what do you mean? He's so into it. He takes notes. He loves it. He comes over afterwards. He says, yeah, those aren't the ones that make it. He says, he told me that in the book of Ruth, it says when Naomi saw that she was really stubborn, that's when she said, that's the one who's going to convert. It's the stubbornness. And so it turned out that this guy actually went through a really tough time soon afterwards. He loved Rosh Hashanah and things, and then suddenly it was like, whoa, this is all too much. And he was at Baye for a while, and he struggled, and it was when he really struggled that he made his strongest commitment. And it turned out that he wasn't really too nice. He just seemed too nice in the beginning. He did give a hard time afterwards, and Baruch Hashem, he did well. But that was something I learned from Mati. That's straight out in the Torah. Okay, so now there's even a pasuk in Yirmiyahu chapter 2. It says, Kishnayim ros asu ami. There are two. Hashem is saying, you guys did two very, very bad things. Shtayim ra'os, two wickednesses. Number one, osi azu mekor mayim chayim. You abandoned me, who's the source of living water. Lachsov lohem boros nishmarim, and then to go dig. So I, Hashem, am metaphorically the source of like so much blessing and goodness, and you went to like dig broken wells which can't even hold the water that's in them, cracked, broken cisterns. So what are you doing? So Rashi says like this: what are the two bad things? Im hemiru yirasam b'kiyotzabu. If a person would have one idol and they would switch over to another religion, that's one problem. Because come on, stick with don't just switch teams every year who you're a fan of because they had a better season. Now I'm an Angel fan, I'm a Dodger fan. But it's also worse because the idolatries that you went to follow are false. So in other words, even if I was false, that would be one bad thing. If you were following a false religion and you just switch to another one, I mean, come on, believe in something, have an opinion, stick with it. And if you can't do that, so then it's even worse now because you switched from a wonderful, beautiful one to a pathetic one. And that's even worse because I'm the real Hashem who has all this blessing for you. And you even see that with Eliyahu Hanavi on Mount Carmel. He says to the Jewish people, how long will you dance on two fences? Poschim al shtei haseipim. How long will you dance on the two? In other words, either follow the Baal or follow Hashem. But pick a lane here. You see that problem? And how could you tell Jewish people that it's better to worship? I mean, wouldn't it be better to do Judaism and a little bit? And the answer is, look, you got to be a person. You got to have an opinion. You got to stand for something. You can't be some flim-flammy, wishy-washy human being. You got to pick one. So it's easier for me. If you'll tell me I believe in the Baal, then I can attack you. Then I can yell at you. Then I can say do tshuva. I can say come on. But if you won't even have an opinion, what hope is there for you? So Rivka is saying, listen, there's a baby in this belly, and it wants to go worship idols whenever it walks by an Avodah Zarah place, and it wants to go keep the Torah whenever it walks by a Torah place. And this is a serious problem for me, because im kain lama ze anochi, then why on earth would you ever have selected me? Lama ze anochi. What do isn't the whole purpose, says the Lev Avram, of picking Rivka so that she would bring to the Jewish people this stubbornness, like Ovadia, like Esav had. Esav is living amongst the biggest tzaddikim, and he's stubborn as anything. He's a warrior. So that's an enormously good midah. Because if used correctly, it's what's needed to be a good Jew. And therefore, Yitzchak, the same way that he loved Rivka, he loved the child who was just like her. And he always understood, yes, he's using it wrong. He wasn't a fool. But so what? He'll use it right soon. The kids who don't want to follow any rules in school are often the ones who have brilliant new business ideas because they don't have this fixed mindset and they're able to see things differently. And therefore they don't listen to anything that doesn't, if there's a more efficient way to do this math, I refuse to do the way the teacher says. I have a daughter like this. She just won't do it the way the teacher says because she has a different way of understanding the math that she wants to do. And I don't want to discourage that at all. To the point that if she fails the class because that's what she's doing, that's not the worst midah to have in the world. To say, I have my way of doing things, I have my way of understanding the world, and I can't let go of that. Okay, so listen, not that I want my kids failing class, but I'm saying that's significant. It's such a good midah to have and to appreciate in a person, that they don't just want to see things the way it's being shown to them, and they want to be stubborn. So that's Rivka Imenu. That was her major. So she's very frustrated. And when she's told it's twins, she's totally fine. She has no problem with a kid who's enamored by Avodah Zarah. And we'll straighten him out. That's fine. It's like what Eliyahu said. If you'll be a worshiper of the Baal, I can work with you. I can talk to you. You have an opinion. You care about something. You believe in it. But if you're just, okay, today I'm this, tomorrow I'm that, wherever they have free lunch, it's not much you can do. You can't really build a shul on the people who go to whichever shul has a nice kiddush that week, right? It's hard to do, right? It's a very difficult thing. You need people that want a seat and want a community and want to play. A little stubbornness goes a long way. Okay, so in other words, if that's the case, then we can perhaps suggest that when we say that Esav is not a child of Yitzchak, in other words, the understanding is that spiritually he doesn't go along with the values of Yitzchak. He didn't take on those values. He didn't, whatever Yitzchak contributes, that's not something Esav bought into. But what Rivka had, he inherited strongly. And that's why Ovadia, who comes from Esav and uses that the right way, is comfortable to live among two other people. And what does he do? It's interesting how he goes out to the caves. That's where he hides out, in the caves, taking care of these chachamim, and then he would go back. In other words, the responsibility to live in a cave is the idea that the Rambam said that if the people around you are negative influence, build your cave. Build your cave. Find a way to do it. And Ovadia is the person who helps the Jewish people do that and save themselves. And that's what's necessary. In other words, have the courage to be who you need to be, despite the people around you. If they're not the right kind of people. And that's what the Jewish people have needed for a few thousand years. We've been surrounded all the time by people with competing values. And the idea that here in Los Angeles, you could raise people who have emunah pshuta and believe in God and grow up to be, bas mitzvah and beyond, and the facts of life have to be explained to them by loving parents and educators, and they're just not corrupted and robbed of their childhoods, is the influence of that. That's a Rivka Imenu, is that you live among Rishon wherever you are. Makoma Anshe Resha, everyone around her. She doesn't learn from their behavior. We have the capacity in Klal Yisrael to do that, but we have to build our societies. We have to build our caves. We have to build our homes in a way that they're safe. And they're, it's interesting that the home of a Jewish person is a boundaried place, so that we know that Hashem was building the world and it was expanding and expanding, and then He said, "Die." He said, "That's enough. That's the right size for the world." Otherwise, it would just be endless, and it would go. It would. So maybe the universe is expanding, but the world, right, is a certain size, and that's up. So Amar Olamo die, and that's one of the names of God is Shin Daled Yud. Amar Olamo die. That's Shakai. Now, on the mezuzah, which is at the midoraisa, right? The mezuzah is on the entrance to the home. We put it at every different door, but it's really the entrance to the home is where you have the main thing, and it says that name of Hashem, because every home is also, in other words, there's a boundary, and then this is what we're doing inside this home is a private place, and it has its boundary. And the Rambam brings in one of his letters that one of the decrees of the Greeks in Hanukkah is that you can't have a front door. Jewish person is not allowed to have a Pesach Beis. They had to be open. And the way that it's always been explained to me by all my Rebbeim, and there's a lot you could say about this, is that the influence of Greek culture, the street, your house had to be open to that. In other words, you've got to have a big television, right, in the house that is preaching at all times, like in 1984, a constant screen that is at all times preaching the values that are antithetical to Torah to your children and your family. And that was a very difficult thing to fight. But the Jewish people had to figure out a way, to be there. And that's very, very much a quality that we're learning is part of the Jewish people. That Avraham Avinu says there's no way. In other words, you could pick somebody from the worst kind of a family, but that midah could be a very useful midah. That midah of stubbornness, of standing up for what you believe in. The Haran thing is a disaster. I did see, I'll tell you one more interesting thing, that Rav Shlomo Kluger explains the following. He says, what does it mean that Esav's not a child of Yitzchak? What are you talking about? I mean, that's his father. How do you say halachically he's not? What do we mean by that? So he says, we know that the Gemara says that Yitzchak was naturally unable to conceive children. That's what it says. Yitzchak was an akar, there's such a Gemara. And that Yitzchak, right? Hashem made Yitzchak an akar, unable to have children. And the reason is because like this. If you have a miraculous ability, right? He says it comes out then that Esav is not Mikoach Avraham. Yitzchak then is not, normally a person receives their ability to procreate from their parent. The parent gives them this ability, and then but if you don't have that ability, and then you wind up having a child, the child isn't connected back to that parent anymore. Because this is some kind of miracle child. This isn't a biological child in the same way as usual. That's what he says. He says, if that's the case, Esav is no longer related to Abraham, nor is Yaakov. But that's only physically. Spiritually, it will depend, right? He says, normally, a person is a child mitzad gufo v'nishmasa, because of your body and your soul. Yaakov was the child of Yitzchak, just like Esav was, because any child is really the child of his father from his guf and his nefesh. But an akar who gives birth, so then the child doesn't really come from his guf. It's not connected to the grandparent in the same way. He says, so how do you connect? If you follow in their spiritual ways, then you demonstrate a connection to their soul and their behavior, and then you are their spiritual child. So he says that's what it means, that Yaakov Avinu connects back into Avraham, right, in that way, and Esav chooses not to. So he's like a Yisrael Mummer. No, he doesn't pick this. He's biologically, right, the child of Yitzchak, but not Avraham. And the only way to connect back into Avram is ideologically choosing that. And otherwise, you're not part of this Messiah. You're just whatever. You're an accident. So he was the child of Rivka, who was capable of having children, according to this. So it's a very interesting idea that we have this capacity by connecting into these midos that are there and these behaviors of what the different avos stood for to be their spiritual children. I mean, we're their biological children. But the second half of it sounds like it's always a choice. To a certain extent, it's a choice. So we're, so if you came from them, in any event, even if we're going to be their children, because our souls are made up of that, and you don't get to choose it, you're still a Jew and you're connected. But certainly identifying those great characteristics in ourselves and realizing that's where they come from is an enormous achievement. And so it's it's worthwhile. It's worthwhile to consider, especially in the light of today's world, where a lot of people are hiding their Judaism, and a lot of people are struggling with this. To realize it's a call the other way, to stand up strongly, and know who we are internally very clearly. And by the way, sometimes that means hiding in a cave. It doesn't necessarily mean that the job is to announce it on every street corner. That's not necessarily the way that. Sometimes that's necessary too. Al Yevosh, don't be embarrassed. If the right place to go is a street corner, walk with your head held proud. But also, sometimes you got to stay and make building a strong and healthy, environment for yourself, for your family, and for our communities. And that's such an important thing. It's the most important thing. The desire for kavod and dignity and what other people think, and how we learn from the behavior of others is so fundamental that even when a person is not doing that, in other words, they're not learning from their neighbors because they're bad, but they've got to find a place where they can. Derek, we also saw they have to build their cave somehow and fill it with 100 chachamim, 50 in this one, 50 in that one, whatever it is. So Ovadia comes to teach us the incredible value. Esav is ultimately doomed because they had this great capacity to be independent and to be leaders and to stand up for what's right. And instead they used it to stand against the positive influences that consistently came their way and didn't allow those in. And Ovadia, who came from them and used it correctly, is the great one who speaks against Esav and says, listen, if I could do it, then that's because I came from Esav and I came from Rivka, and all the rest of you could have done it. And if you didn't do it, you'll be held responsible. Okay, that's what I wanted to share this evening. And I thank everyone. Thank you guys for coming, even in the rain. Next week, I will not be having this year, and then the one in 2 weeks, it remains to be seen. Only because I have to see what my schedule